Hello everyone! Last fall I had a lot of fun reviewing the 1985 TV miniseries adaptation of Anne of Green Gables, and I promised that I'd come back to do the sequel. I didn't mean for the wait to be this long, but better late than never, right? Today we're going to talk all about the follow-up that came in 1987, Anne of Green Gables, the sequel, or as I've always known it, Anne of Avonlea, which is the name that was on our 2-tape set. And of course we still have this. Why would we get rid of it? Like the first miniseries, this was written, produced, and directed by Kevin Sullivan, and Megan Follows returns as Anne Shirley, the charming redhead whose love of life, drama, and romance is as zesty as her occasional outbursts of temper. In my opinion, this is a very worthy follow-up. The way it comes on the heels of the first one and brings back so many actors and sets and locations means it works perfectly as a companion. You can easily watch the first one and move right on to the sequel, provided you have the time. Each one is just under 4 hours long, so keep that in mind if you are going to try to marathon it. As to the age-old question that comes up whenever you're discussing a sequel, which one is better? I don't know. I love them both, and I've always struggled to choose. Probably the first one has the edge. It's one memorable incident after another, and it's just overflowing with heart, and I think it might hang together a little better too. But I love so much about the sequel, and I'll cover as much of what I love as I can, and there are parts I feel are absolutely indispensable to the overall story of Anne Shirley, so I really can't imagine one without the other. Anne of Green Gables was based on the 1908 children's novel of the same name by Lucy Maud Montgomery. While the second one, depending on who you talk to, takes its name from the second book in the series, it does not follow the second book exclusively. In fact, it takes very little from the second book. Kevin Sullivan pulled plot lines, conflicts, characters, and amusing anecdotes from the next 3 books in the series, Anne of Avonlea, Anne of the Island, and Anne of Windy Poplars, or Anne of Windy Willows, and wove them into one script. Personally, I've never had any problem with this, but I did see the film multiple times before I ever read the books, and that makes a huge difference. I'll say a little more about the changes toward the end of this video. The supporting cast is full of returning characters. Most prominent are Marilla Cuthbert, Gilbert Blythe, Diana Barry, Miss Stacy, and Mrs. Lynde. But it's a pleasure to see other familiar faces make brief appearances, including the Barrys, Aunt Josephine, Mr. Blythe, Thomas Lynde, Miss Lawson, Josie Pye. Well, maybe it's a little less of a pleasure to see her again. Jane Andrews, Ruby Gillis, Moody Spurgeon, and Minnie May. And a string of new characters comes into the picture when Anne leaves home, ones that she'll instantly recognize as kindred spirits, and ones that she'll butt heads with and have to win over. The main theme, at least of the first part, which Megan Follows conveys so well, is Anne's resistance to change. She doesn't take to all the newness that's unfolding around her. She's uneasy watching her childhood companions grow up and settle down. When she finds out Diana's getting married, from Gilbert, not from Diana herself, she's dismayed, especially by Diana's unromantic choice of a husband, short, derpy, unimaginative Fred Wright. And then when Gilbert, who Anne only perceives as a good friend, proposes marriage, she's completely discombobulated. It's not that Anne doesn't want to grow up, she doesn't have Peter Pan syndrome, but she doesn't want life to change this fast. She's so attached to her memories of how things were that it's hard to accept that things are bound to be different now. This is a common theme in Montgomery's books. Her young heroines often struggle to reconcile themselves to the transition from carefree adolescence to adulthood. It's touched on in the Emily trilogy, and it's a dominant theme in Mistress Pat, which is the sequel to Pat of Silver Bush. But coupled with Anne's rising melancholy are her lofty dreams and ambitions. She's got the writing bug, and she wants to be published. She wants to get out there and experience life a bit. She wants to have a career. She wants adventure in the great wide somewhere. What she doesn't want is to relinquish those dreams and do what everybody else does just because it's expected of her. So with her soul in upheaval because Diana's married now and she's just broken poor Gilbert's heart, so there goes that friendship too, Anne embarks on her own journey, leaving Avonlea for Kingsport, where she takes a job as an English teacher at an all-girls school. Unfortunately, the school and the town are dominated by the Pringle clan, a rich, powerful family that resents her presence, and they're determined to do everything they can to cause trouble and force her out. Anne faces challenges that try her patience and push her to her limit, and encounters some prickly people, and in the process, she learns it's not just everyone else who changes. She herself becomes older and wiser, discovering that the things she always fantasized about may not in fact be the things that are the most important. Now, there's a lot I could rattle on about here, and I had trouble organizing this review because this is my opportunity to talk about all this stuff, and I want to touch on every little thing I enjoy. But I've got to try to rein it in, or else we'll be here forever. So I narrowed it down to 5 main discussion points. There were 3, now there are 5. I did the best I could. First, while this sequel revolves around Anne's battles as an out-of-place school teacher and her romantic confusion, it still places a great emphasis on the relationship that arguably was the main focus of the first film, Anne's bond with Marilla Cuthbert, who sent her brother Matthew to pick up a boy from the orphanage and was chagrined when he brought a girl home instead, a girl who was much more talkative and accident-prone than the Cuthberts were used to. While Anne was quickly able to connect with shy Matthew, Marilla's formidable personality was not as receptive, nor was she as forgiving of Anne's somewhat reckless decisions. But watch the first movie and you'll witness the most wonderful thawing out as Marilla's exasperation turns to amusement and pride and fierce love for this girl who unexpectedly showed up. The chemistry between Megan Follows and Colleen Dewhurst that helped make the first one so heartwarming continues to be in evidence here, and I'm grateful that Kevin Sullivan gave them so many scenes together because they're all golden. Multiple times, Marilla reassures Anne how grateful she is that she came into her life, although it hardly needs to be said when their moment of parting is so bittersweet. Any sadness in that scene is made up for later when they're joyfully reunited. When Anne needs counsel, Marilla has words of wisdom and draws from her own experience to advise Anne not to make the same mistakes she did, and when Anne goes through heartache, Marilla is there to comfort her. Second, while compared to the first film, their time together is relatively short. I love that we still have scenes of Anne and Diana hanging out and getting into crazy trouble. The scene where they chase the cow through the muddy field is hilarious, with Diana trying so hard to be sophisticated and refined. She is not keen on chasing after Anne or this cow, but she does it because Anne's her best friend and she needs help. And then, of course, there's the shenanigans on the night before Diana's wedding, where they get so silly in their last hurrah that they accidentally break the furniture. There's bittersweetness here as well, though, and it's so relatable. If you've ever drifted apart from a longtime friend and gone your separate ways, or if you've watched a close friend get married, in that moment, you're so happy for that friend, but you also know that things between you are probably never going to be the same again. There's evidence that Anne and Diana had already drifted apart. Through Gilbert, we learn that Anne's been too busy writing in her free time to socialize, and in her absence, Diana's formed this attachment. It's pretty telling that Anne didn't know how serious things were, and that Diana didn't tell her because she knew how critical Anne would be of Fred. Their first scene together is a quarrel, and it's rough, but it's understandable. So Diana now has this other person, someone else to be loyal to, who's going to claim her time. She's going to have her own home to manage, and soon she's going to be raising a family, and that's how it goes. Anne's not just seeing her best friend get married, she's seeing the end of an era in her own life. Of course, Anne's going through all of her own turmoil as far as the marriage question goes, and part of her discomfort with Diana's marriage stems from her choice of a husband, because Anne has a very set idea of what she wants, and Fred ain't that type at all.
Tall, irresistibly handsome, proud, and melancholy.
I could say her notions are ridiculous, but, I had my own hot villains and tormented brooding heroes phase.
Well, I wouldn't marry anyone who was really wicked. But I think I'd like it if he could be wicked and wouldn't.
That was probably me at some point in junior high or high school. A lot of girls go through a phase like that. You grow out of it, or your tastes change, or you learn to differentiate between what's cool in fiction and what's desirable in real life. If you don't, and you continue to chase after moody, angsty guys, I don't know how happy you're going to be in real life, but that's another subject. Gilbert Blythe is decidedly not the hero Anne has been dreaming of and writing about, and it doesn't help that he criticizes her male characters and makes fun of the exaggerated way they talk. When you think about it like that, it's no wonder Anne's so vehemently opposed to accepting him. I understand her feelings. I don't share them. I'm with Diana.
And I refused.
You what?
But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll come back to this. Anne's adventures and misadventures in Kingsport lead to the introduction of several new characters, as I said, and most of them do not start out as Anne Shirley fans. But if you've read the books, you know Anne's got a magic touch where difficult people are concerned. It doesn't happen overnight, of course, but Anne does manage to win over the Pringle clan, make a student's surly father fall in love with her, and help an enemy see that the potential for happiness hasn't entirely escaped her grasp. There are two characters introduced who are so good, and I only fully appreciated the depth they bring to the story during this recent rewatch. The characters are Mrs. Harris and Miss Catherine Brooke. Mrs. Harris is played by Dame Wendy Hiller, who I didn't know from anything else the first few times I saw this. She's probably most famous for playing Eliza Doolittle in the 1938 film adaptation of Pygmalion opposite Leslie Howard and directed by Anthony Asquith. She is an absolute delight here, playing a reclusive and autocratic grande dame, or an old battle axe if you want to be less respectful. Mrs. Harris's granddaughter Emmeline is one of Anne's students, one of the few who isn't horrible, and she takes to her immediately. Unfortunately, things happen, Emmeline gets in trouble, and her father pulls her out of the school. Anne, who was partially to blame, is determined to keep Emmeline up to date with her studies, so she gets an audience with Mrs. Harris, Emmeline's guardian, to request that she be allowed to tutor her. Thanks to an outrageous misunderstanding, Mrs. Harris thinks Anne is threatening to blackmail them, so she agrees to let Anne pay regular visits. Naturally, Anne is a breath of fresh air in the old house, and Mrs. Harris gradually comes to enjoy her company and lets herself be cajoled into doing some wildly uncharacteristic things.
I don't eat my lunch outside with anyone, girl. I'm not a raggle-taggle gypsy. Take me in, take me
Hush,
in.
Mrs. Harris. Some of these young girls are Pringles.
Pringles?
Yes, and you don't want them running home and telling tales.
You'll pay for that.
Wendy Hiller's performance here just gets better and better. It almost feels like they just let her loose and kept the camera rolling.
I don't care what the Pringles say. I think you're quite good looking.
Thank you.
Her aristocratic delivery of her dialogue is so perfect, as are the sneaky little chuckles that betray how tickled she is by all the upheaval.
I don't know how you'll manage her, Miss Shirley. She's such a baby.
There's no one she likes needling more than her daughter Pauline, played by Kate Lynch, also a delightful character, a nervous, black-clad wallflower who is as much in awe of Miss Shirley as she is her mother, who she's both devoted to and terrified of. And yet she also feels a little bit of rebellion.
And don't slide down the banisters.
Mama.
Well, you did at Nancy Pringle's wedding.
Mama, that was 25 years ago. What do you think I am?
Anne works wonders with both of them, and while all the frustrating nonsense at the school is going on, it's great to have this fun stuff happening as counterpoint. The other Goliath that enters Anne's life is Miss Catherine Brooke, headmistress of the Kingsport Ladies' College, who is brilliantly played by Rosemary Dunsmore. It's not just that she's a strict and sarcastic disciplinarian who thinks Anne's ideas are nonsense. She is consumed with bitterness. She despises Anne's youth and optimism, and later her success, and sneers at any act of pity or kindness. She is an easy character to dislike. You wonder, what is this woman's problem? Why is she so venomous? The answer comes at last in this tense scene where she delivers a cold monologue that provides some insight into her backstory. You can start to put pieces together and understand why she's determined to tamp down her emotions, why she scorns softness, why she channels her pain and loneliness into an all-consuming hatred. Catherine Brooke is probably the darkest, most complex character within these two films, and she seems like a lost cause. But when we see her standing on the sidelines watching Anne and sneering at her, I think there's also a hunger there. When Anne invites her to come to Green Gables for the summer, I think she accepts partly in defiance, maybe a little because she wants to make Anne uncomfortable, but also I think she's snatching at a last scrap of hope. So she comes to Green Gables feeling incredibly awkward, but everyone, including Anne, is so friendly and kind and hospitable, and the place is so beautiful, that she just falls apart.
Everything's always been so easy for you. I got in a trap. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to get out.
There are various moments in this I find moving, although not as many as in the first one, but the one that really gets me is this scene where she breaks down and confesses the hate and the self-loathing that she's harbored for so long. She also confides in Anne, with the first genuine smile we've ever seen on her face, her secret desire to travel, and this woman's redemptive arc is so good, so well written, so well acted. It's a mature and piercing storyline. You know, I love a good redemptive character arc, and I feel like while you might have expected her to come around, the extent of her regeneration is something that's not anticipated, and it just adds a whole other layer to this film. With Anne's help, she becomes a whole new person at Green Gables, lighter, freer, more relaxed, with a tentative new confidence, and it's a wonderful thing to see. But it's not a one-way street with these characters. Anne doesn't just do her thing and change their lives for the better. She learns something in return, which gives her valuable insight into what she wants for her own future. Mrs. Harris talks about her late husband, how they were both willful people with tempers, and they bickered a lot. Yet even as she's laughing over a funny memory of one argument, she becomes emotional.
Could he go away and leave me alone and crippled like that? Dying was the only thing that he ever dared to do without consulting me. Well, it won't be long before we're together again.
Draw a parallel to Anne and Gilbert, who had a rocky start. She wouldn't even speak to him for, a year? They were ferocious academic rivals, and then as friends, he teases her and pushes her buttons, and she gets mad whenever he calls her out. Here's one of the objections she gave to their getting married.
Anne, that's not what I'm looking for at all.
We'd end up like two old crows fighting all the time.
But in Mrs. Harris's case, that friction just lent another spark to their married life. She loved her husband, even though they weren't in perfect agreement all the time. Actually, you get the sense that she wouldn't have liked it if they had been, that was part of their relationship. Anne refers to the prosaic reality of Gilbert, and I think she's doing him wrong by saying that. She has so much fun with him. Why does she assume all that would come to an end if they got married? Mrs. Harris would probably say that being married would only increase the fun, not end it. And then Catherine Brooke offers a bleak picture of what Anne's future might hold if she continues to be a teacher. Year after year, making enough money to live, but not enough to do much else, never advancing any further, with no real home of her own, and no one to come home to. Of course, Miss Stacy seems to have avoided such unhappiness, but Miss Brooke speaks of many teachers who started out just like Anne, whose vitality and bright ideas burnt out, leaving them miserable and alone. Thanks to her experiences in Kingsport, Anne ends up reevaluating her plans and ambitions. Plus the encouragement she gets from Gilbert, the one time they bump into each other, to write something about Avonlea, helps her make up her mind about what she wants, at least as far as achievement goes. So in case you lost track, I've covered 4 points: Anne and Marilla's tight bond, the crossroads in Anne and Diana's friendship, the delight that is Mrs. Harris, and the regeneration of Catherine Brooke. Something that's been weaving in and out of the discussion, though, is Anne's relationship with Gilbert. It's a bit up to interpretation whether Anne's feelings for him change, or she just comes to realize something she felt all along. I would say it's a little of both. During the first hour of this, it definitely isn't a case of loving him and not knowing it. Every time the poor guy tries to say something romantic, or put his arm around her, or reach out to her, she's either oblivious or not having it. Jonathan Crombie's portrayal of Gilbert Blythe is just... He was adorable in the first one, but somewhere along the line here, he grew up, and it's like, Anne, if you don't marry this wonderful young man, you're out of your mind. I mean, he's tall, he's dark, he's good looking. More importantly, he's smart, he's kind, he's thoughtful, he's loyal, he's honest, he's easy to talk to, he's a good listener, which is not the same thing. He's responsible, he's got a good sense of humor, and they're great friends. Not that you should marry someone just because you're friends with them, but I do believe that it's a good thing to be best friends with your spouse. He's the one she confides in about her humiliation over her story, and her disappointment about Diana, and her fears about the future. He's the one who cares so much he's willing to incur her wrath by giving her constructive criticism, to give her a better chance at success, which he wants for her as much as she does. It's Marilla who breaks the news to Anne that he's in love with her, which apparently everyone was aware of except her, and Marilla, who's never exactly been on the Team Gilbert bandwagon, who reminds Anne of all the selfless things he's done for her. And still, Anne is like, yeah, but he's not romantic enough, and I don't love him, not like that. Which, fine, by all means, you shouldn't get into a relationship with someone just because they do something nice for you. And you definitely shouldn't marry someone that you're not in love with. But how could she not be in love with him? It's a long, tough road to a happy ending, especially if you have a crush on Gilbert, because after the first hour, it's a long time before he shows up again. But I think it requires that much time for Anne to mature and her feelings to develop. There's an aspect of absence makes the heart grow fonder here, and I think Anne experiences a little of that when they meet again, as evidenced by her rush to see him off at the train station and her sorrowful wave goodbye with the assumption that the next time she sees him, he'll be married. And then they throw another suitor into the mix, a character who does not appear in the books, but is rather a composite of a couple characters from books 3 and 4, Captain Morgan Harris, played by Frank Converse. When I was younger, I didn't like this guy at all, and I'm still not a big fan, because my loyalty to Gilbert is unflinching. But maybe because I've aged some myself, he seems more charming and less ancient than he used to, though he's still way too old for Anne, who's only a few years older than his daughter. Morgan Harris is a rich widower and reputed ladies' man, something Anne gets a hint of the first and second time they meet on the dunes in the very first scene, and when his motor car almost crashes into her horse-drawn carriage in the dark.
I'll bet no one's ever told you how becoming red hair can be in the moonlight.
Actually, lots of people have.
But while he comes across as a flirt then, with his playful gallantry and quips, his behavior is completely different when he encounters her in a professional setting, suggesting a changeability I don't care for. He's kind of a complicated figure. Not a great dad, at least when Anne meets him, since he'd rather be doing business or hobnobbing with other swells than spending time with his adoring daughter, and as dashing as he might seem, his social skills leave something to be desired.
I gave explicit orders that my daughter was to have no further association with Kingsport Ladies' College.
But like his mother, his sister, and his daughter, he develops a fondness for Anne, going so far as to bring her along on the family excursion to Boston. And while the Kingsport rumor mill leads Anne to believe he's courting someone else, and therefore trifling with her, the truth comes out when he asks her to marry him, after she kicks him in the shin.
Let go of me.
Please, I would not... Oh!
I think this proposal might have shocked me when I was a kid. I just didn't see it coming. What's equally startling, though, is that just for a moment, Anne actually considers accepting him. What? Anne, what are you doing? But getting inside Anne's head, I can understand what's going on here. Besides the fact that he's fabulously wealthy and able to sweep her off her feet, and she loves his daughter, and she seems to like him, does he not have some of the qualities she's fantasized about? Maybe he's not the dreamy, poetic type, but he's got the moody, melancholy, secret burden thing down. So I don't really blame her for her split second of hesitation. And perhaps when she's faced with the possibility of marrying another man, she recalls the last proposal she received, and does a little compare-contrast. I must say, by the way, even though I never really warm up to the guy as a love interest, I do appreciate the way he takes her answer. He's much less wounded than Gilbert was, he doesn't make it awkward by trying to persuade her to accept him, and he agreeably escorts her back inside for a just friends dance. What really changes everything, of course, is Anne's discovery when she returns home that Gilbert may be dying of scarlet fever. There's nothing like almost losing someone to make you realize how much that person means to you, and how desolate you'd be without them. And that leads to the moving scene where Anne rushes to his bedside to give him her newly published book, fastest printing I've ever heard of, and show him his name in the dedication, and he rasps out that his wedding to Christine has been called off.
There would never be anyone for me but you.
And then the love story that's very slowly been unfolding finally culminates in the last scene, which is my favorite scene in the entire thing, and one of my favorite feel-good endings, period. I love the setting on the bridge with the Avonlea autumn in the background. I love the way he listens intently when Anne speaks, and I love the lesson she learned.
I don't want sunbursts or marble halls. I just want you.
I love that he doesn't explicitly propose again, and they don't have to state their feelings because it's all understood. And then we get the long-awaited kiss, and though it's short, it's sweet and rewarding. And then he hugs her in a way that says, "Finally, this is home to me. This was worth almost dying for." It's just so lovely. But wow, I can't believe how long this video is, and I still have a few other comments I want to make, so if you'll hold on just a little bit longer. As previously mentioned, there are some big changes from the books, such as The removal of the Dora and Davy storyline, the condensing of Anne's days teaching at the Avonlea school, and the cut of Anne's years at Redmond College, which means they skip her romance with Royal Gardner, who is the epitome of her romantic ideal, and she's sure he's the one, but then after 2 years he proposes and she turns him down, suddenly realizing she was more in love with the idea of him. Also excised is a significant character death in Anne of the Island, which always makes me cry, even though I wasn't especially attached to that character. That character does appear here, but very briefly, and every time this person shows up, I'm like, oh, but that doesn't happen here, so okay. The bulk of the narrative is actually taken from Anne of Windy Poplars, but a lot of the circumstances are changed, including the fact that in that book, Anne is already engaged to Gilbert when she goes there. Despite the omissions and changes, however, the story at its core is the same one Montgomery told, and the beauty of it is that you can watch this and enjoy it, and then you can read the books and enjoy them just as well, and uncover all these little surprises that are only in the books, and, it's great. And now, a lightning round of observations. I enjoy the glimpse we get of Anne as a teacher, especially her cunning way of handling discipline. The part where Anne unwittingly and reluctantly wins the Rollings Reliable Baking Powder contest is one of my favorites. The look of shock and mortification on her face is hilarious, as is Diana's smugness over the whole thing. It demonstrates what a good friend she is, but
I added, in which we will never use any baking powder except Rollings Reliable. Oh.
Miss Lawson is right, though. Baking powder is a remarkable product. I love Thomas Lynn's reaction to the story, which definitely wasn't intended to be a comedy. I hate the part when Thomas collapses and is calling for Rachel. It's so awful. I hate that there's a snake in this movie, and no, I'm not going to show a picture of it. I do find it a shame that Anne's so out of touch with her friends. She was a lot closer to them in the books, whereas here it seems like she hasn't seen them in ages. As much as there's something about Gilbert's proposal that makes me want to curl up and die, he says a lot of great sensitive things, like promising that unlike everyone else, he will never change. The problem is, she thinks he's changed already, when in truth, he's the same as he's always been. She just doesn't see it. It also drives me crazy in the proposal part 2 that she makes so many assumptions about what Gilbert wants. It's like, just stop it. Note of appreciation here for Christine, who's a genuinely kind person and speaks up for Anne when people like Josie Pye make catty comments. Also a shout out to the one teacher at Kingsport Ladies College who smiles and makes an effort to be friendly to Anne. Jen Pringle is the worst. They did such a good job making her unlikable that when things turn around and we're supposed to like her now, I just can't do it. Realistically, if I were a parent, I would be wary of a teacher who forms such a close bond with a student, especially to the extent of going on vacation with her family. I know it's a different time, but it still seems unprofessional, even if the age proximity between them makes it a sisterly relationship. Another thing about this monologue of Catherine Brooks is that, according to the details she shares, her harsh upbringing could have been Anne's had Anne not been adopted by the right people. I'm so glad that there's this scene of ice skating, as short as it is. I love Victorian and Edwardian ice skating. I do have trouble keeping track of time. Like, when Anne runs into Gilbert here, just how long has it been since she last saw him? It feels like it's been a year, but it's probably just been a few months, right? In addition to all of his other lovable qualities, Gilbert is a great hugger. There's a cameo from a young Dave Foley in this scene. I know he's famous for a lot of other things, but I know him as Troy from the wacky 1998 movie Blast from the Past. I like the aesthetics of the impromptu proposal in the snow. It bothers me that Anne's friends didn't tell her sooner about how sick Gilbert was. How long were they gonna wait? I love how excited Marilla is about Anne's book. As in the first one, the costumes and hairstyles are gorgeous, and they nailed the Gibson Girl look without overdoing it. Likewise, once again, Haggard Hardy's music is beautiful, as are all the location shots. Okay, I think that's enough. I hope you enjoyed this long-winded review, or compilation of observations. If you have seen this particular film, I would love to know what you think of it, so please go ahead and share your thoughts on it in the comments below. I look forward to reading what you all have to say, and I'll be back next time with another review. Thanks for watching.